President, can I first of all apologise for the fact that I'm inadequately dressed this evening? It's not because I'm a horny-handed son of toil, as my good friend Anna Soubry thinks, and this won't go down well with the workers, because of course nothing is good enough for the workers, and it's important that everybody should be able to wear black tie and drink champagne. In the great socialist paradise that Mr Corbyn is about to bring about, that will be the lot of everyone. We will all be reading The Spectator. We will all be sending our children to Eton. Everything will be the best possible world. The real reason I couldn't wear black tie is I was doing an interview with the BBC literally just before coming here at Durham Station, objecting to the £2 billion bailout by Chris Grayling, a notable Brexiteer, of Sir Richard Branson, and I didn't think appearing in black tie on BBC Look North would give the best possible image to my cause. But it's a delight to be with you this evening. I cannot tell you, as a member of the House of Lords, how wonderful it is to be in an assembly of the under-80s. Peter may be joining us soon. He also will fortify the youth contingent in the House. I went to the House of Lords at the tender age of 43, and you're introduced in this ceremony where, you think from reading the demo, we all wore these ermine gowns the whole time. You only wear them when you're introduced. And as I came in, somebody said they thought sotto voce, but it ricocheted around the chamber. It has very good acoustics like this one. My God, it's child labour. The average age in the House of Lords is 69, and I can tell you, having sat through 2 days of the debate on the EU withdrawal bill today, there's a lot of people who go into their 90s who still have much profound wisdom that they wish to impart. But it's very, very important and significant that the body which is debating this issue this evening is a body of the young, because you're going to have to live with the consequences of what happens over the coming decades. And I tell you, this is a debating assembly, but these issues are very, very serious. Very serious. They go to the heart of the prosperity and the well-being of this country for the next generation. The significant thing about the speeches of James and Peter is that James did not mention the words trade or markets once. Not once. This is the lifeblood and the main purpose of the European Union. A customs union and a single market which safeguard our trade. Not once. We had all manner of lectures on elitism from somebody who writes for The Spectator and the Daily Telegraph. We had all of that, and Mr Farage, by the way, I know Mr Farage very well. The first time I met Mr Farage was almost exactly 10 years before the 23rd of June 2016, when I was giving the prizes away as Minister for Education at Dulwich College, when who should have been in the front row but one Nigel Farage wearing his Dulwich College blazer and old boy's tie with his son who was there at the school. The idea that somehow Brexit is being promoted by those people who have the interests of the masses at their heart is one of the greatest lies at the heart of this project that we're debating. But what is going to matter as we leave is what is going to happen to our trade. We have a customs union at the moment with no customs tariffs. What is going to happen? Lord Bridges, who was a minister responsible in the department for exiting the European Union until like about half of the government in the last year, he exited that department. He said in the House of Lords 2 days ago that Brexit, he said, was a gangplank to nowhere. A gangplank to nowhere, because the government has no policy at the moment as to what is going to happen to British trade and tariffs when we leave the European Union. Then there's the single market. The single market, which Peter will know well, because he was one of the ministers who promoted it as a member of Margaret Thatcher's cabinet. The single market was a British project to seek to force open the services markets of France and Germany to our brilliant services sector, led by the city and all these big employers, which many of you are going to go and work for in 2 or 3 years' time, providing there are any jobs left for you to go and work for in due course. It was a big project. No, I'm going to carry on. You've got your say in a moment. A big project to open markets so that we could trade. What is our policy? Are we going to be in the single market or not? Well, if you listen to Mr Fox, apparently we're not going to be. If you listen to the Chancellor, apparently we are going to be. We have the full extremes of options for the whole future of this country within the Cabinet at the moment. What we do not have is a single policy which is credible before we leave the European Union. Now, what all this reminds me of is a famous essay by George Orwell, perhaps his most famous essay, Politics and the English Language, in which he said, writing in the 1930s, that at times of crisis, he said, at times of crisis, political language is used to disguise lies and to give solidity to mere wind. Those were his words. So we're being told at the moment by the Prime Minister that by leaving the European Union, we will forge a deep and special partnership with the European Union. Think about that for a moment. A deep and special partnership with the European Union, which we are leaving and wrecking the existing deep and special partnership, with potentially calamitous consequences, as my colleague said, our whole international position when we have Putin at one border and China not far away. We're told we're going to have frictionless trade. Frictionless trade, when the policy is to erect thousands of trade barriers. Where did that one come from? Then the third one, the best one of all, is in this toing and froing about what we're going to do in respect of Ireland. And this is no joke, ladies and gentlemen. Think of the history of this country and the calamities which we've had in our relations with Ireland over the last 5 or 6 centuries. We are told that there will be complete regulatory alignment. Think of those words, complete regulatory alignment between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, when the only reason for doing Brexit is that there will be regulatory de-alignment. So the whole thing is being sold on a fundamental lie. Now, why is it being sold in this way, you may ask? Well, this comes very much to the experience that I've had myself in politics over the last 50 years, which hasn't been in foreign policy or defence or trade. Indeed, until the great crisis which we now face with Brexit, I'd never made a speech in Parliament or devoted any time to those issues. I left them to the experts, like the MEPs and the former trade ministers who had done these jobs before. What I'd spent my time doing was as Minister for Schools, seeking to reform the schools so we get a decent education system in this country, and so that the opportunities which so many of you have had to excel at school are extended to that large part of the population which had had substandard schools ever so long. And I was Secretary of State for Transport, and I ran the National Infrastructure Commission, planning infrastructure, because though Boris Johnson doesn't seem to have realised it with his plans for bridges where there are already tunnels and so on, we haven't necessarily been planning out infrastructure well over the last generation. Brexit, ladies and gentlemen, is a massive distraction from those issues. All the time I visited the North East, which was frequently as Transport Minister and as Education Minister, I was not having big arguments about the future of the European Union or trade or anything else. I was having big arguments with, let me be frank, local authorities controlled by my party often, the Labour Party in the North East, about what we were going to do with failing schools, how we were going to get tough on seeing that we had high standards, working with Teach First to get teachers from universities like this into those schools. When I was Secretary of State for Transport, I spent a long time up there getting a new factory established at Newton Aycliffe, not very far from this great university, which is going to make the new Hitachi trains, which is the successor trains to the 125s. Why did Hitachi come to the North East? So that they could build trains in the North East to export to Europe. If we're leaving the European Union, I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that factory does not stay in the North East. It moves to Hungary or Poland or possibly Germany, because they looked at sites there where they can develop a larger market. They came deliberately to engage in the European market. Now, to Nigel Farage and to others who promote Brexit, this is all irrelevant. They're not really concerned about these issues. What is happening, and this is fundamental to the understanding of Brexit, is they do understand, because they're populists, that there is a social crisis in this country. Anyone with eyes to see, and who looks at that vote 2 years ago, knows that. There is a massive challenge faced by Left Behind Britain. Educational standards, housing, the NHS, the quality of jobs. But what has happened with Brexit is seeking to scapegoat Europe and foreigners for all of the problems which we should be addressing at home, and which if a government was doing its job properly, it would be addressing. So why do I regret Brexit? I think in its own terms, it is potentially a tragedy. Our whole history as a country has been intertwined with Europe. We are a European power. We can no more walk away from our continent than we can tow this country into the middle of the Atlantic. But I regret it doubly, because for all of those who are left behind in the modern economy, in our modern society, who demand the attention of government, whether it's Labour or Conservative, all that is happening is not just a distraction, but it is scapegoating people who are totally irrelevant to this process these people, the commissioners, I can assure that you have no responsibility for education or transport or the health service or any of this. It is scapegoating those for the challenges and problems which we should be addressing at home. So I say to you, the right thing for us to do is not to do Brexit, but to address the social crisis, to be relentlessly internationalist in our approach, not to be Little Englander, xenophobic and inward-looking, but to be bold in tackling housing, the NHS, education, those big social challenges. That is what we should do as a country, and your generation, above all, should be the ones who lead us into that better future. Thank you very much.